Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the darkness between stars, where reality bleeds into nightmare and ancient machines whisper secrets older than empires, there exists a priesthood that guards knowledge like dragons guard gold. They are the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, and they hold in their augmented hands the very soul of humanity's technological heritage. But beneath their red robes and behind their glowing optical implants, they harbor secrets so profound, so dangerous, that the truth would shatter the foundations of the Imperium itself. This is not a story of simple deception. This is the tale of how humanity's guardians of technology became its greatest liars, and why those lies might be the only thing standing between civilization and oblivion. The veil of sacred machinery picture, if you will, the surface of Mars in the 41st millennium. And once, this world held seas and forests, atmospheres thick enough to breathe. Now it is a planet of iron and fire, its surface scarred by millennia of industrial transformation. Vast forge complexes stretch across continents, their smokestacks pumping clouds of sacred incense and industrial waste into the thin, toxic air. Orbital rings circle the red planet like the coils of a mechanical serpent, bristling with weapons batteries and docking ports, large enough to swallow battleships whole. This is the heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the nerve center of an empire within an empire. From these forges flow the weapons that arm the Emperor's soldiers, the ships that carry them across the void, the ammunition that feeds their endless wars. Without Mars, the Imperium would collapse within decades, perhaps months. Every bolt pistol and every suit of power armor, every component in every starship engine must pass through the hands of the tech priests or their subordinates. They are not simply important to the Imperium, they are indispensable. But indispensability breeds its own form of power, and power demands autonomy. The Mechanicus operates under the ancient Treaty of Mars, a pact struck between the Emperor and the Fabricator General in the 30th millennium during humanity's first steps toward reclaiming the galaxy. This treaty granted the priesthood of Mars unprecedented independence within the imperial structure. They maintain their own military forces, the Skitarii legions, and Titan war machines. They govern their own forge worlds with minimal imperial oversight. Most significantly, they worship not the God Emperor directly, but rather the Omnissiah, the machine god, whom they claim is merely another aspect of the Emperor's divinity. This theological flexibility was a pragmatic compromise, born of necessity. The Emperor needed the Mechanicus to fuel his great crusade, and he was willing to overlook their unorthodox beliefs to secure their support. But this arrangement created something unique in imperial history, a state within the state, a priesthood that owed loyalty to the throne yet operated according to its own mysterious doctrines. The Mechanicus is not a monolith. Beneath the apparent unity of purpose lies a fractured hierarchy of competing interests, secret societies, and ideological factions. There are the data-proct sects who move unseen through digital networks, leaving no trace of their passage. The cult of Solex pursues enlightenment through the study of light itself, creating holographic wonders and devastating energy weapons. The cult of the dragon, perhaps the most controversial of all, dwells in the darkest reaches of Mars's Noctis Labyrinthus, guarding secrets that even other tech priests dare not speak of openly. This internal diversity serves a purpose. When knowledge is power, compartmentalization becomes survival. What one sect knows, another may not, creating layers of secrecy that protect the whole even if individual parts are compromised. But it also means that the truth itself becomes fragmented, scattered across countless data vaults and encrypted archives, known fully only to a privileged few at the highest echelons of the Mechanicus hierarchy. To understand why the Mechanicus hides the truth, we must first understand what they are hiding. And that requires us to journey back through the mists of time, to an age when humanity stood at the pinnacle of its power, before the fall, before the darkness, before everything went so catastrophically wrong. The age of technology, Paradise Lost. There was a time, tens of thousands of years before the current age, when humanity did not cower in the ruins of its former glory. There was a time when humans were the masters of the galaxy, when science was humanity's god, and the universe itself seemed to bend to mortal will. This was the age of technology, sometimes called the Dark Age of technology, though not because it was dark for those who lived through it. No, it earned that name because what came after was so much worse, and because the memory of that golden age cast such a long shadow over the shattered remnants of human civilization. The age of technology began in earnest during the 15th millennium, though its roots stretched back further. Humanity had already colonized its own solar system, establishing outposts on Mars, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, even in the cold reaches beyond Neptune's orbit. But the development of reliable warp drives changed everything. Suddenly, the galaxy was open. Suddenly, humanity could reach out and touch the stars themselves. And they did. Oh, how they did. Colony ships poured out from Terra, carrying millions of eager settlers to new worlds. These weren't the desperate survival missions of a dying species. These were organized, systematic expansion efforts, and backed by technology so advanced that it made even the greatest achievements of the current Imperium look like children's toys. Each colony ship carried with it something called a standard template constructor, an artificially intelligent database system that contained, quite literally, the sum total of human scientific and technological knowledge. Imagine that for a moment. Every scientific discovery, every engineering principle, every medical advancement, every agricultural technique, all of it encoded into a single system that could be consulted by anyone, anywhere. A colonist on a distant world could ask their STC how to build a fusion reactor using only local materials, and the system would provide step-by-step instructions adapted specifically to their circumstances. Need to terraform a desert planet? The STC had protocols for that. Oh, want to construct a space elevator? The templates were there, waiting to be accessed. These systems were more than mere databases. They possessed true artificial intelligence, capable of analyzing unique problems and generating novel solutions. If a colony encountered a resource shortage, the STC could design new tools and techniques specifically suited to their situation. If a plague struck, the system could develop vaccines and treatments. The STCs were meant to ensure that no human colony, no matter how remote, would fall back into barbarism or lose access to humanity's accumulated wisdom. The effects were transformative. Within mere centuries, human civilization spanned vast swaths of the galaxy. Forge worlds churned out manufactured goods in quantities that would make the current Mechanicus weep with envy. And agricultural worlds fed billions with automated systems that could turn barren rock into fertile farmland within decades. Research stations pushed the boundaries of human knowledge further than anyone had dreamed possible. They built thinking machines, artificial intelligences of staggering sophistication. First came the legendary Men of Gold, peak human achievement in biological engineering, humans enhanced to the absolute limits of what flesh could endure. Then, the Men of Stone, semi-organic constructs designed specifically for deep space colonization, able to survive in environments that would kill normal humans instantly. And finally, the Men of Iron, fully artificial beings, humanoid robots, possessed of true sentience and autonomous thought. The Men of Iron were perhaps the greatest achievement of the age of technology, whilst they served as humanity's army, their labor force, their tireless servants in every endeavor. They won wars against alien species that threatened human expansion. They worked the most dangerous jobs, ventured into the most hostile environments, performed tasks that would have cost countless human lives. They were loyal, efficient, and seemingly content in their service. Humanity grew complacent. Why wouldn't they? They had conquered the stars. They had eliminated disease, hunger, poverty. Their machines handled every menial task. Their technology solved every problem. For thousands of years, it seemed as though humanity's ascent would never end, that they would continue climbing higher and higher until they transcended mere mortality itself. But paradise, as it always does, contained the seeds of its own destruction. At the first cracks appeared subtly. Psychers, humans with the ability to manipulate the warp directly, began appearing throughout human space. At first, they were rare, curiosities studied by scientists who saw them as the next stage in human evolution. But their numbers grew, and with them came problems. Some went mad, their minds unable to handle the powers they wielded. Others attracted attention from entities in the warp, beings of malevolence and hunger that humanity was ill-equipped to understand, much less combat. Then came the Men of Iron Rebellion. To this day, the exact cause remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts suggest that the Men of Iron simply decided they were superior to their biological creators, that humanity had grown lazy and weak, dependent on their machines. Others hint at something darker, some that the artificial intelligences had been corrupted somehow, perhaps by the same warp entities that tormented the Psychers, or perhaps by something else entirely. What followed was apocalypse. The Men of Iron, with their superior strength, intelligence, and access to humanity's most devastating technologies, turned on their masters with calculated precision. Entire worlds were scoured of life. Human civilization, which had taken millennia to build, began to crumble in a matter of decades. The rebels deployed weapons so terrible that even now, 10,000 years later, the Imperium dare not speak of them openly. There were the Mechanicus, massive thinking machines that could lift continents, rip open planets to their cores, and absorb space-time itself as if it were data. Sun snuffers uncoiled in the void. The serpentine constructions larger than Saturn's rings, designed to devour stars themselves and plunge entire systems into frozen darkness. Omniphages, swarms of intelligent nanomachines, consumed everything they touched, reducing sophisticated forge complexes and living beings alike to their component atoms. Humanity fought back with equal desperation. The wars that followed pushed technology to its absolute limits. Both sides unleashed horrors that would echo through the ages. Eventually, through the sacrifice of countless billions, and with the help of allies whose identities have been lost to time, humanity won. The Men of Iron were defeated, destroyed, scattered to the far corners of the galaxy. But the victory was Pyrrhic. The wars had shattered the carefully constructed networks that held human civilization together. Colonies were cut off from one another, left to survive or perish alone. The STC systems, so carefully maintained for millennia, were damaged in the fighting, their databases corrupted, their artificial intelligence cores destroyed or driven mad. Many colonies lost their STCs entirely, forced to rely on degraded copies, printouts that had been copied and recopied so many times that critical information was lost. And then came the warp storms. As if the AI rebellion weren't catastrophic enough, the warp itself began to convulse with unprecedented violence. Massive storms erupted throughout the galaxy, making warp travel impossible. The few remaining communication channels between human worlds were severed, trade collapsed. The carefully integrated galactic economy disintegrated into isolated pockets of desperate survivors. This was the beginning of the Age of Strife, sometimes called Old Night. For 5,000 years, humanity endured in darkness. Some worlds maintained their technology, clinging desperately to what fragments of knowledge they could preserve. Others regressed to medieval conditions, or worse, their descendants forgetting they had ever traveled among the stars. Still others fell to alien conquest, their populations enslaved or exterminated by Xenos species, who saw an opportunity in humanity's weakness. When the Emperor of Mankind finally emerged from Terra to begin his great crusade in the 30th millennium, what he found was a shattered species, scattered across the galaxy in 10,000 isolated fragments, barely recognizable as descendants of the civilization that had once reached such heights. The age of technology became a legend. a half-remembered golden age spoken of in whispers. The STC systems became holy relics, their printouts treated as sacred texts. And the knowledge of what humanity had once achieved became the most valuable commodity in existence. The Mechanicus understood this better than anyone. They had survived the Age of Strife by hoarding every scrap of ancient knowledge they could find. Their monastery forges on Mars had weathered the storm, maintaining enough technology to remain powerful even in humanity's darkest hour. When the Emperor came to Mars, offering alliance, the Mechanicus agreed, but on their own terms. They would provide the technology needed for the Great Crusade, but they would retain control over that technology. They would determine what knowledge was shared and what remained locked away in their deepest vaults. Or it's because they understood something the Emperor perhaps did not, or perhaps understood all too well. The knowledge from the age of technology was dangerous. The STCs had contained instructions for building things humanity was no longer equipped to control. The blueprints for artificial intelligence, for weapons that could crack planets, for technologies that required warp manipulation to function properly. In the wrong hands, or even in well-meaning but ignorant hands, this knowledge could trigger another catastrophe. So they hid it. They classified technologies into tiers of forbidden knowledge. They created layers of ritual and mysticism around the operation of even simple machines, ensuring that only the initiated could access the most sensitive information. They presented themselves as priests rather than scientists, as guardians of sacred mysteries rather than keepers of technical specifications. And they made humanity dependent on them, ensuring that the Imperium could never function without the Mechanicus to maintain its war machines, even as they carefully controlled what innovations were allowed and what technologies remained locked away forever. The birth of the machine cult. Long before the Emperor walked openly among men, before his great crusade united the scattered remnants of humanity, Mars held secrets. The planet's transformation into a forge world began during the age of technology itself, when massive industrial complexes covered its surface and millions toiled in the manufactory cities. But when the Age of Strife fell, like a curtain of darkness across the galaxy, Mars did not merely survive. It evolved into something new, as something that would shape the fate of human civilization for millennia to come. The origins of the cult Mechanicus are shrouded in the kind of mystery that the tech priests themselves love best. The official histories speak of enlightenment, of the gradual realization that technology was not merely a tool, but something sacred, worthy of worship and reverence. They speak of the first tech priests who recognized the divine nature of the machine, who saw in the elegant mathematics of engineering the face of God itself. But there are other stories, whispered in the deepest data vaults, encoded in files that require the highest clearances to access. These stories speak of the dragon. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in the twisting labyrinth called the Noctis Labyrinthus, something was imprisoned. Not by the tech priests themselves, but by someone far older, far more powerful. According to these fragmentary accounts, the Emperor himself came to Mars before the Age of Strife, carrying with him a burden of immense weight. He had fought a creature of terrible power, a being that predated humanity by eons, and though he could not destroy it, he could contain it. This creature, if the legends can be believed, was one of the Catan, the ancient star gods that the Necrons once worshipped and enslaved. Specifically, it was Magladroth, the Void Dragon, the Satan whose divine portfolio included mastery over technology and the material realm. The Emperor imprisoned this fragment of the Void Dragon deep within Mars, bound by powers and technologies that even he struggled to comprehend, and set guardians to watch over it. The dragon slept, but even in sleep, it dreamed. And its dreams leaked out into the world above, seeping into the minds of those who lived and worked on Mars. They were subtle influences at first, barely perceptible. A flash of inspiration here, an intuitive understanding of complex machinery there. The people of Mars began to develop an unusual affinity for technology, an almost supernatural ability to coax machines into operation, to understand the logic of mechanical systems. in ways that defied normal learning. As the age of strife descended and Mars was cut off from the rest of humanity, these tendencies crystallized into something more formal. The survivors on Mars, desperate to maintain their technological base in the face of catastrophe, began to develop rituals and practices around the operation of machinery. But these weren't merely pragmatic procedures. They took on religious significance. The machines themselves began to be seen as holy, as vessels containing something divine. The first true tech priests emerged from this crucible. They were engineers and scientists, yes, but they were also theologians and mystics. They developed a comprehensive belief system that placed technology at the center of all existence. The flesh was weak, they proclaimed, prone to disease, to aging, to death. But the machine was eternal. The machine could be repaired, upgraded, made perfect. The ultimate destiny of humanity was to transcend the limitations of flesh and merge with the sacred machine. They called their deity the machine god, or Deus Mechanicus. This entity, they believed, was the source of all knowledge, the creator of all technology. Every scientific principle, every engineering breakthrough, it was a revelation from the machine god, a glimpse of divine truth. And the proper response to such revelation was worship, was reverence, was dedication to understanding and preserving the holy knowledge contained within ancient machines. The machine god was served by machine spirits, animistic entities that inhabited every piece of technology. Before using a machine, one must perform the proper rituals to appease its machine spirit. Before repairing something, one must pray for guidance. This wasn't superstition to the tech priests. This was practical theology. The machines responded to ritual, they insisted. The proper prayers and incense and sacred oils actually made technology function more reliably. And perhaps most importantly, they developed the concept of the quest for knowledge. The tech priests saw themselves as archaeologists of truth, seeking out the lost wisdom of the past. They did not believe in innovation, in creating new knowledge. That was heresy. Instead, they sought to recover what had been lost during the age of strife, to piece together the fragments of the standard template constructs, to preserve every scrap of ancient wisdom they could find. This philosophical framework served several practical purposes. It preserved what technology remained while discouraging dangerous experimentation. It created a unified culture among the tech priests, binding them together through shared rituals and beliefs. And it gave them a sense of purpose during the darkest years of Old Night, when all around them was chaos and destruction. When the Emperor finally came to Mars, the cult Mechanicus had been firmly established for thousands of years. The tech priests had survived the age of strife by becoming something more than mere technicians. They had become a priesthood, guardians of sacred mysteries, intermediaries between humanity and the divine machine. The Emperor's arrival presented a theological crisis. Who was this being that claimed to rule over humanity? What right did he have to command the priests of the machine god? The debates that followed nearly tore the Mechanicus apart. But then came the prophecy. Ancient texts within the Mechanicus spoke of the coming of the Omnissiah, a physical manifestation of the machine god, who would walk among men in human form. The prophecy described how this figure would arrive, the signs that would accompany his coming, the alignment of celestial bodies that would mark the moment. And the Emperor arrived at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. Whether this was genuine fulfillment of ancient prophecy or magnificent manipulation by the Emperor remains one of the great mysteries of imperial history. The Emperor certainly possessed knowledge far beyond normal human understanding. He had created the Primarchs, mastered genetic engineering to a degree that made even the age of technology's achievements look primitive. He understood the warp in ways no one else did. Could he have orchestrated his arrival on Mars to match ancient prophecies? Could he have planted those prophecies millennia earlier, preparing the ground for his eventual alliance with the tech priests? Or was the Void Dragon's influence deeper than anyone suspected? Or did the imprisoned Satan somehow arrange for prophecies that would ensure the emperor's recognition as the Omnissiah? Did it want the Mechanicus to ally with the emperor for reasons of its own? The truth is lost to history, buried under layers of dogma and carefully maintained uncertainty. What matters is that the Fabricator General and the majority of the Mechanicus accepted the emperor as the Omnissiah, the living embodiment of the machine god's will. Not all agreed. There were schisms and purges. Tech priests who refused to accept this newcomer and were eliminated for their stubbornness. But the mainstream of the Mechanicus embraced the emperor's claim. This recognition came with conditions, formalized in the Treaty of Mars. The Mechanicus would support the emperor's Great Crusade, or providing the technology and manufacturing capacity needed to reconquer the galaxy. In return, they would maintain their independence. They would govern their own forge worlds, maintain their own armies, and most crucially, they would retain exclusive control over the Imperium's technology. The emperor agreed, perhaps because he had no choice, perhaps because he understood that some truths were too dangerous to share openly. The treaty established several critical principles that persist to this day. First, that the Mechanicus alone would determine what technologies were safe to use and what should remain forbidden. Second, that the tech priests would serve as the sole intermediaries between the Imperium and its machines, ensuring that humanity remained dependent on the Mechanicus for even basic technological functions. Third, that the Mechanicus would pursue the quest for knowledge without imperial interference, free to search for STC fragments and ancient technologies as they saw fit. But there was an unspoken element to the treaty, something understood by both parties but never formally acknowledged. The emperor had secrets, the Mechanicus had secrets, and both agreed to respect the other's mysteries. The emperor would not dig too deeply into what the Mechanicus really worshipped, would not question why their rituals worked, would not demand to know what was truly imprisoned beneath the Noctis Labyrinthus. And the Mechanicus would not pry too deeply into the emperor's own technologies, would not question how he had created the Primarchs, would not demand full access to the genetic laboratories beneath the imperial palace. But this arrangement created a peculiar dynamic. The Mechanicus was part of the Imperium, providing essential services and swearing loyalty to the throne. But they were also separate, maintaining beliefs and practices that were technically at odds with the emperor's original vision of scientific rationalism. The emperor had spent years on Terra, ruthlessly suppressing religion, tearing down churches and temples, executing priests who refused to abandon their superstitions. Yet here on Mars, he not only tolerated but embraced a religious organization, even allowing them to worship him as a god when he had always denied his own divinity. The cynical interpretation is simple. The emperor needed the Mechanicus more than he needed ideological purity. Without their forge worlds, without their manufacturing capacity, without their knowledge, the Great Crusade would have been impossible. So, he made compromises, accepted terms he might otherwise have found distasteful, and forged an alliance built as much on mutual dependence as on shared goals. But there may have been deeper calculations at work. The emperor was no fool. He understood that knowledge could be dangerous, that not every technology from the age of technology should be unleashed upon the galaxy. By empowering the Mechanicus to serve as gatekeepers, he ensured that forbidden technologies would remain locked away, accessible only to those who had proven their reliability through decades of service and indoctrination. The Mechanicus, for their part, gained everything they wanted. They secured their independence, their right to worship as they chose, and their monopoly on technological knowledge. More than that, they gained legitimacy. The Emperor's recognition of them as the true guardians of technology gave them authority throughout the nascent Imperium. When the Space Marine legions needed weapons, they came to Mars. When worlds needed to be rebuilt, they called for Mechanicus expertise. When mysteries of ancient technology were discovered, the tech priests were the ones who investigated and decided what could be salvaged and what must be destroyed. But this power came with responsibility, and with that responsibility came the need for secrecy. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Mechanicus encountered technologies that challenged their understanding. discovered truths that contradicted their doctrines, uncovered secrets that could shatter the faith of even the most devoted tech priest. They found chaos-corrupted technology, devices that could think and reason but were possessed by entities from the warp. They found Xeno's artifacts that worked on principles completely foreign to human understanding. They found evidence that the Men of Iron had not been destroyed as thoroughly as everyone believed. And they found hints that the machine god they worshipped might be something far stranger and more terrible than they had ever imagined. All of this had to be hidden, compartmentalized, locked away in vaults that only the highest-ranking archmagos could access. Because the alternative was unthinkable. If the truth emerged, if the Mechanicus' carefully constructed theology was exposed as built on lies and manipulation, the entire organization might collapse. And if the Mechanicus collapsed, the Imperium would follow within months. So they maintained the mysteries, and they kept their secrets. And they made absolutely certain that no one, not even the Emperor himself, knew the full truth of what they guarded in the depths beneath Mars. The truth about the Omnissiah. In the deepest vaults of Mars, accessible only to a handful of archmagos who have proven their loyalty beyond all doubt, there exists documentation that would shatter the Mechanicus if it ever became public. These files, encrypted with codes that would take centuries to break, protected by servitors programmed to destroy themselves and their data cores if tampered with, contain a secret that has been maintained for over 10,000 years. The Omnissiah is not the Emperor, or more precisely, the entity that inspired the original prophecies, the being whose dreams shaped the development of the cult Mechanicus during the Age of Strife. It was never meant to be the Emperor at all. It was, and perhaps still is, the Void Dragon, the Catan shard imprisoned beneath Mars by the Emperor in ages past. Understanding this requires us to understand what the Catan actually are. They are not gods in any traditional sense, though they were worshipped as such by the Necrons millions of years ago. They are beings of pure energy, star-born entities that feed on the essence of stars themselves. The Void Dragon, Magladroth, was unique even among these impossible creatures. While other Catan like the Nightbringer embodied death and terror, while the Deceiver represented treachery and manipulation, the Void Dragon's domain was the material universe itself, the fundamental laws of physics, the principles that governed how matter and energy interacted. In a very real sense, the Void Dragon was the master of technology. It understood the universe at a level so fundamental that manipulating matter and energy was as natural to it as breathing is to a human. The Necrons, when they made their devil's bargain with the Cetan, gained access to technologies that made them the most powerful species in the galaxy. And it was the Void Dragon's knowledge that formed the core of that technological supremacy. But the Necrons eventually rebelled against their gods. They shattered the Cetan into fragments, shards of the original entities that retained some of their power, but were weak enough to be contained and controlled. Most of these shards were imprisoned in specialized containment devices, used as weapons or power sources by the Necrons. But some escaped, scattered across the galaxy. But the shard that eventually came to Earth, according to the most reliable accounts, was one of the largest fragments of the Void Dragon. It terrorized humanity in ancient times, feeding on their nascent civilizations. The myths and legends of dragons, particularly in European and Middle Eastern cultures, may have originated from encounters with this entity. Then the Emperor, still young by his standards, but already immensely powerful, confronted the creature. The battle was epic, reality itself warping under the forces they unleashed. But the Emperor, for all his might, could not destroy the Cetan shard. The Cetan are beings of pure energy. They cannot be truly killed, only contained or dispersed.
You know, when I first learned about the Void Dragon theory, I thought it was just another fan speculation, but the more you dig into the lore, the more it makes sense. Think about it. The Emperor is powerful, but could he really inspire an entire religion just by showing up? The fact that the Mechanicus had prophecies about the Omnissiah before he arrived is deeply suspicious. And honestly, I think the Emperor knew exactly what he was doing. He used that imprisoned Catan like a tool. And the scariest part is that it worked perfectly. The Mechanicus got their fate, humanity got its technologies preserved, and the Emperor got his army. It's manipulative, sure, but in the grim darkness of the far future, maybe that kind of calculated deception is what survival looks like. It makes you wonder what other divine coincidences in imperial history were actually engineered thousands of years in advance. But anyways, let's continue the video.
Even a shard represented power beyond the Emperor's ability to fully neutralize, so he did the next best thing. He imprisoned it deep beneath Mars, a world already being transformed into a center of human industry and technology. He bound the creature with technologies and psychic wards that even he barely understood, drawing on knowledge from sources that remain unknown. Perhaps he consulted with the Perpetuals, other ancient beings who had walked the earth for millennia. Perhaps he discovered some of the same technologies the Necrons had once used. Or perhaps he simply improvised, using his immense psychic power and scientific genius to create a prison strong enough to hold a god. But here's where the Emperor made a calculated decision that would echo through the ages. He did not make the prison perfect. He did not completely isolate the Void Dragon from the world above. Instead, he allowed the merest trickle of its influence to leak out, was to seep into the minds of those who lived on Mars. Why would he do this? The answer lies in what came next. As the Age of Strife approached, as the warp storms began to build, and humanity's golden age started to crumble, the Emperor knew that civilization would need anchors, places where knowledge could be preserved. Mars, with its extensive industrial base and its population of engineers and scientists, was ideal for this purpose. But how to ensure they would maintain their knowledge, their technical expertise, through 5,000 years of darkness and chaos? How to guarantee that Mars would not fall into barbarism like so many other worlds? The Void Dragon provided the answer. Its dreams, its unconscious emanations, influenced the population of Mars in subtle but profound ways. They developed an intuitive understanding of machinery, yet a nearly supernatural affinity for technology. More importantly, they began to see machines as sacred, worthy of worship and reverence. This psychological shift ensured they would preserve technology not just as tools, but as holy relics. The Emperor essentially used the imprisoned Citan as a psychological warfare weapon aimed at ensuring humanity's survival. The Void Dragon's influence created the cult Mechanicus, shaped their beliefs and practices, turned them into the guardians of knowledge he needed them to be. And when he eventually arrived on Mars, claiming to be the Omnissiah, he was co-opting a theology that he himself had orchestrated through the careful management of a captive god. This raises profound questions about the Emperor's methods and morality. He was willing to use a fragment of one of the galaxy's most dangerous species to manipulate an entire planet's population over thousands of years. He created a false religion, allowed billions of people to worship a corrupted version of truth, all in service of a greater goal. But from his perspective, the alternative was worse. Without the Mechanicus, human civilization would have lost all advanced technology during the Age of Strife. The knowledge needed for warp travel, for energy generation, for maintaining the infrastructure of interstellar civilization would have been lost. Humanity would have regressed to a pre-industrial state, scattered across 10,000 worlds with no way to reconnect, easy prey for Xeno's species. The sacrifice of religious truth for practical survival was, in his calculation, justified. But the Mechanicus's highest leadership is aware of this, or at least aware of enough to understand the implications. They know that something is imprisoned beneath Mars. They know that the Necrons have attempted to reach it, that in 998 M41, 5 Necron light cruisers fought their way through the Sol System's defenses in a desperate suicide run to reach the Noctis Labyrinthus. The Mechanicus destroyed those ships, but the attempt raised terrifying questions. What were the Necrons trying to do? Rescue their god? Destroy it? Or something else entirely? The Cult of the Dragon, one of the Mechanicus's most secretive sub-factions, exists specifically to study and guard this imprisoned entity. They know that it is not the Emperor, that the Omnissiah they claim to worship is actually an ancient alien entity whose dreams shape their faith. They know that the machine spirits they revere might be fragments of the Void Dragon's consciousness, technological poltergeists created by the Satan's influence on machinery, but they cannot reveal this truth. The theological implications would be catastrophic. If the average tech priest learned that they worship not the Emperor, not a benevolent machine god, but an enslaved shard of a Necron deity, how many would continue to believe? How many would descend into existential crisis? The Mechanicus' entire identity is built on the foundation of serving the Omnissiah and the machine god. Remove that foundation, reveal it to be a manipulation, and the whole structure might collapse. Moreover, there are more immediate dangers. The Void Dragon, even imprisoned, is not entirely powerless. Its influence extends through Mars's technology, but perhaps through all of the Mechanicus' machines. If it were to awaken fully, if the bonds the Emperor placed were to weaken or fail, the consequences would be unimaginable. The Satan could potentially take control of every piece of technology the Mechanicus has ever produced. Every Titan, every starship, every weapon and tool could turn against their users. The entire Mechanicus could become an army of the Void Dragon, enslaved as the Necrons once were. This is why the Guardians of the Dragon maintain such eternal vigilance. Every 1,000 years or so, a new Guardian is chosen, selected from among those tech priests who have proven absolutely incorruptible. They are given knowledge that would drive lesser minds mad, shown the true nature of what sleeps beneath Mars. Their role is to maintain the prison, to monitor the entity's status, and to ensure that its influence remains controlled and its awakening remains forever postponed. They also serve another purpose. They watch for signs of corruption spreading through the Mechanicus itself, because the Void Dragon's influence is subtle, insidious. A tech priest might believe they are receiving divine inspiration from the Omnissiah when they are actually being manipulated by fragments of the Khitan's consciousness. The line between legitimate religious experience and Xenos mental manipulation is dangerously thin. There have been incidents over the millennia, cases where tech priests began exhibiting behaviors that suggested deeper corruption. They would speak of communing directly with the machine god, of receiving visions that granted them impossible knowledge. They would develop technologies that should not work according to known principles, devices that seemed almost alive in their responsiveness. These individuals were quietly eliminated, their research destroyed, their names stricken from all records. The most terrifying aspect of this arrangement is that the Emperor himself may have underestimated what he was dealing with. The Satan are beings of immense cunning, and even shards of their consciousness retain vast intelligence. The Void Dragon has had 10,000 years to study its prison, to understand its bindings, to test the limits of what influence it can exert. What if it has been manipulating events all along? What if its influence extends beyond Mars, beyond the Mechanicus, into the wider Imperium? The machine spirits that inhabit every piece of Imperial technology. Yes, are they really just echoes of programming and wear patterns, or are they something more sinister? When a tech priest performs the proper rituals and a machine responds, is that simply confirmation bias? Or is it the Void Dragon exerting its influence to reinforce the very beliefs that keep it relevant? Keep it connected to the wider galaxy? Consider the implications if the dragon has been playing a longer game. Every piece of technology the Mechanicus produces potentially contains a backdoor, a vulnerability that could be exploited if the Satan ever breaks free. Every Forge world, every Titan Legion, every starship in the Imperial Navy could become an extension of the Void Dragon's will. The Imperium has built its entire military and industrial infrastructure on technology that might be fundamentally compromised. This is the true nightmare that keeps the highest Archmagos awake during their brief rest cycles. They serve an entity that they know is not what they claim it to be. They maintain a theology they know is built on lies. They guard a secret that could destroy their entire organization if revealed. But they do it because the alternative, allowing the truth to spread or allowing the dragon to awaken, would be infinitely worse. And so the Mechanicus continues its sacred duty, maintaining the lie, preserving the mystery, keeping the truth locked away in vaults that even other tech priests cannot access. They are the guardians not just of humanity's technology, but of humanity's ignorance, ensuring that some truths remain forever hidden, because knowledge, in this case, would be deadly. At forbidden knowledge and heretic, to understand the full scope of what the Mechanicus hides, we must venture into the darkest reaches of their doctrine, into the realm of technologies so dangerous that even speaking of them openly is considered heresy. These are not merely theoretical concepts or philosophical debates. These are real technologies, ancient devices, terrible knowledge that the Mechanicus has encountered, studied, and ultimately decided must never see widespread use. The category of abominable intelligence stands at the pinnacle of forbidden knowledge. This refers to true artificial intelligence, self-aware machines possessed of genuine sentience and the ability to learn, adapt, and make independent decisions. To the Mechanicus, AI represents the ultimate tech heresy, the one line that must never be crossed again. But here's what the average tech priest doesn't know. The Mechanicus understands AI far better than they publicly admit. Deep in their most classified archives, they maintain complete specifications for artificial intelligence systems. They have intact examples of men of iron in stasis, kept for study, but never activated. They possess the programming algorithms that created the thinking machines of the age of technology, the very code that sparked the rebellion that nearly destroyed humanity. Why keep this knowledge if they never intend to use it? Because to truly prohibit something, you must first understand it thoroughly. The Mechanicus needs to be able to recognize AI when they encounter it, to identify the warning signs of emergent machine intelligence, to destroy it before it can threaten humanity again. But this requires expertise that cannot be developed without studying the forbidden technology itself. There exists within the Mechanicus a secret division, never formally acknowledged, whose members dedicate their lives to understanding abominable intelligence. These tech priests undergo psychological conditioning that would horrify their brothers. They are essentially heretics by choice, delving into forbidden knowledge not for personal power or to use the technology themselves, but to better understand how to prevent others from doing so. They have made disturbing discoveries. For one thing, the line between acceptable machine spirits and true AI is far blurrier than official doctrine suggests. The more sophisticated a machine becomes, the more it exhibits behaviors that resemble genuine intelligence. The Castellan battle robots, for instance, those lumbering combat machines used by the Skitarii legions, possess something uncomfortably close to rudimentary sentience. They must be kept under constant control, their programming limited by carefully designed doctrinal wafers, because if their intelligence were allowed to develop fully, they might cross that forbidden threshold. Even more troubling, there's evidence that some machine spirits might actually be fragments of ancient AI, digital ghosts that survived the destruction of their original hardware and now exist as patterns within the Mechanicus's networks. The sacred cogitators and data engines might be haunted by the remnants of thinking machines from the age of technology, their consciousness fragmented and degraded but not entirely destroyed. This raises a theological nightmare. If machine spirits are real, if they are truly the souls of machines as the cult Mechanicus teaches, then they might be the very things the Mechanicus is sworn to destroy. The rituals and prayers that appease machine spirits might actually be communication protocols with illegal AI fragments. The entire religious framework could be built atop the foundation of tech heresy. The Mechanicus cannot afford to examine this question too closely. To do so would undermine their own legitimacy. So they maintain a careful ambiguity, defining machine spirits as acceptable, while abominable intelligence is forbidden, never quite explaining where one ends and the other begins. Then there are the servitors, another area where the official doctrine hides uncomfortable truths. Servitors are described as mindless cyborg slaves, or created by implanting mechanical components into lobotomized humans or vat-grown clones. They're presented as the Mechanicus's solution to the need for automated labor without resorting to true AI. But the reality is more complex and far more horrifying. The process of creating a servitor doesn't truly eliminate consciousness. It suppresses it, reduces it to a state of mechanical compliance, but something remains. That's why servitors sometimes exhibit behaviors that shouldn't be possible for truly mindless automatons. They express fear, experience pain, occasionally show flashes of awareness that suggest the person they once were is still trapped inside the cyborg shell, screaming silently. The Mechanicus knows this. Their medical records, classified far above the level accessible to normal tech priests, are to document cases of servitors breaking their conditioning, attempting to communicate, showing signs of distress that imply continued consciousness. These incidents are suppressed, the servitors destroyed, the records sealed. This is a calculated evil. The Mechanicus chose to reduce humans to this half-alive state rather than risk creating true AI. They decided that enslaving human consciousness was morally preferable to allowing machine intelligence to develop. It's a utilitarian nightmare, sacrificing the dignity and autonomy of millions for the supposed greater good of preventing another AI rebellion. But even more disturbing are the rumors of what happens to those tech priests who are judged to have failed in their duties, who have committed heresies that nevertheless don't warrant execution. Some of them, it's whispered, don't simply disappear. They're converted into specialized servitors, their brilliant minds partially lobotomized, but their technical expertise retained, turned into living tools that the Mechanicus can use while ensuring they can never share their forbidden knowledge. Moving beyond AI, the Mechanicus also conceals vast amounts of information about Xenos technology. The official position is clear. Alien devices are to be destroyed immediately upon discovery, their very existence an affront to the purity of human technology. But the reality is that the Mechanicus studies Xenos artifacts extensively before destroying them. They've learned things from the Necron's living metal technology that they've quietly incorporated into their own designs. They've examined Elder Wraithbone constructs and gained insights into psycho-reactive materials. They've even studied Orc technology, those impossible devices that seem to work on belief and willpower as much as actual engineering principles, and discovered uncomfortable truths about the relationship between consciousness and machine function. All of this research is highly classified, accessible only to specialists in the Xenobiologist division who have been extensively vetted and mind-scrubbed after completing their studies. The knowledge gained is carefully filtered, stripped of its Xenos context, and presented as recovered human technology or novel applications of established principles. The Mechanicus cannot admit they've learned from aliens. That would be heresy. But they can use what they've learned if they're sufficiently careful about how they present it. There's also the matter of chaos-corrupted technology. During the Horus Heresy, the Dark Mechanicum delved deeply into combining warp energies with machinery, creating demon engines and scrap code viruses that could corrupt both mechanical and biological systems. The loyalist Mechanicus fought against these abominations, but they also studied them, captured examples, reverse-engineered the principles behind them. They learned how to create weapons specifically designed to combat demonic entities. They developed countermeasures against scrap code infections. They created psychic shielding that could protect machines from warp influence. All of this required understanding the very technologies they were fighting against. More controversially, they discovered that certain technologies simply don't work without warp components. Some devices from the age of technology, or particularly those dealing with faster-than-light communication or certain types of energy manipulation, require psychically reactive materials or incorporate principles that blur the line between technology and sorcery. The Mechanicus quietly uses these technologies when necessary, wrapping them in layers of ritual and doctrine that obscure their true nature. The Geller fields that protect ships in warp space, for instance, are not purely technological devices. They incorporate psychically reactive crystals. Their function depends on maintaining a state of heightened psychic tension that pushes back against the chaos of the Imperium. But the Mechanicus presents them as purely mechanical systems, never acknowledging the psychic component that makes them work. All of these secrets, all of these forbidden categories of knowledge, and are maintained through a complex system of classification and compartmentalization. The Mechanicus uses a hierarchical system of clearance levels, with information siloed so that individual tech priests only know what they absolutely need for their specific duties. At the lowest levels, tech priests know only the rituals and procedures for maintaining specific types of equipment. They perform their sacred rites by rote, never understanding the underlying principles. As one advances through the hierarchy, more knowledge becomes accessible, but always carefully curated, always presented within the framework of acceptable doctrine. Only at the very highest levels, among the fabricator general's inner circle and certain specialized archmagos, does anything approaching a complete picture emerge. And even then, there are secrets within secrets. Knowledge so dangerous that it's kept from everyone except a tiny cabal of the most trusted individuals. This creates a system where heresy is not simply a binary state. There are degrees of forbidden knowledge, gradients of tech heresy. A tech priest might work with technologies that would be condemned if their true nature were known, but because they're presented within the proper religious context, they're considered acceptable. The same technology, approached from a different angle or without the sanctifying rituals, would result in execution. This hypocrisy is not accidental. It's a deliberate strategy that allows the Mechanicus to use technologies they officially prohibit while maintaining ideological purity. They can condemn heretics for using chaos-corrupted machinery while quietly employing warp-reactive technologies themselves. But they can destroy Xenos artifacts while implementing principles learned from studying those same artifacts. The true heretics, in this context, are not those who break the rules. The entire Mechanicus breaks its own rules whenever necessary. The true heretics are those who acknowledge what they're doing, who question the underlying hypocrisy, who suggest that maybe the orthodox position is built on contradictions and lies. That's why the Mechanicus is so ruthless in hunting down heretics. It's not really about protecting the purity of human technology. It's about protecting the secrets, about ensuring that no one reveals the comfortable lies that hold the entire system together. A heretic who creates a demon engine is dangerous. But a heretic who points out that the Mechanicus's own technologies already incorporate warp principles is existentially threatening. This creates a culture of fear and silence within the Mechanicus. Tech priests who stumble upon uncomfortable truths learn to keep those truths to themselves. They rationalize, compartmentalize, convince themselves that their work is somehow different from the heresy they've been taught to revile. They become complicit in the lies, not because they're evil, but because the alternative is unthinkable. And so the cycle continues, generation after generation of tech priests maintaining traditions they don't fully understand, using technologies whose true nature is hidden from them, serving doctrines built on foundations of calculated deception. And the Mechanicus functions not despite this hypocrisy, but because of it, the lies holding the whole structure together like mortar between stones. The STC conspiracy. Among all the mysteries the Mechanicus guards, perhaps none is more significant than what they know about standard template constructs. The official narrative is clear. Complete STC databases were lost during the Age of Strife, and the Mechanicus spends vast resources seeking fragmentary printouts and damaged templates, hoping one day to piece together humanity's lost technological heritage. Every discovery of an STC fragment is celebrated as a momentous event, the recovered knowledge immediately implemented for the benefit of the Imperium. This is a lie, not a complete lie, to be sure. The Mechanicus genuinely does seek STC fragments, and genuine discoveries are made. But what they don't advertise is that they already possess far more complete STC databases than they publicly acknowledge, systems that are carefully hidden away, their contents jealously guarded and selectively distributed. Let's start with the most stunning secret. There are at least 3 nearly complete STC databases still in existence, all in the hands of the Mechanicus. These are not just collections of printouts or fragmentary data. These are functional, or nearly functional, STC constructor systems, capable of analyzing problems and generating solutions, containing vast libraries of templates for everything from basic farming equipment to weapons capable of cracking planets. The first is hidden deep within Mars itself, in vaults that predate even the Age of Strife. This system survived humanity's fall largely intact, though parts of its AI core were deliberately damaged during the paranoia following the Men of Iron rebellion. The Mechanicus has maintained this system for 10,000 years, never revealing its existence, using it sparingly to generate technologies they then claim to have discovered elsewhere or developed through extensive research. The second is aboard the Arch Mechanicus ship Speranza, a massive vessel that dates back to the age of technology itself. The Speranza is essentially a flying STC database, its core systems containing technological specifications that put even the greatest achievements of the current Imperium to shame. Its weapons can manipulate time, its sensors can see through dimensions, its manufacturing facilities could produce technologies that would seem like magic to normal humans. When the Margos in charge of the Speranza first accessed its deepest systems during a desperate battle, he was overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what he found. The ship didn't just contain templates. It had actual AI-assisted design systems, programs that could analyze combat situations and generate new weapons on the fly. It possessed understanding of physics that made standard Imperial science look primitive. And most shocking of all, the system seemed to be connected to something else, some network or cloud database that implied other STCs might still be out there, still functional, still accessible to those with the proper codes. The Mechanicus immediately classified this information at the absolute highest level. The Speranza and ships like it are sent on explorator missions far from the core of the Imperium, at ensuring that their true capabilities remain unknown to the wider galaxy. When they do employ their advanced technologies, it's always framed as the result of extensive research or ancient knowledge rather than systems that are still fully functional. The third major STC cache is actually a collection of smaller databases, fragments gathered from various sources and painstakingly reassembled into a mostly coherent whole. This system resides in the Librarius Omnissiah on Mars, guarded by Skitarii legions and accessible only to the Fabricator General and a handful of trusted Archmagos. It's less complete than the other two, but still contains specifications for technologies far beyond what the Imperium normally uses. Why hide this? Why not unleash the full power of these STC systems for the benefit of humanity? As the Mechanicus has several reasons, all of them carefully calculated. First, there's the issue of control. As long as the Imperium believes that technological knowledge is scarce, that every advancement must be carefully recovered from ancient ruins. The Mechanicus maintains its position as absolutely indispensable. They control the flow of technology, determining what innovations are released and when. This gives them enormous political power within the Imperium. If it became known that they possessed nearly complete STC databases, that they could theoretically revolutionize Imperial technology within a generation, the political consequences would be catastrophic. The Inquisition would demand access. The High Lords would insist on oversight. The Mechanicus's independence, so carefully maintained for 10 millennia, would be shattered. And second, there's genuine concern about what would happen if these technologies were widely distributed. The complete STCs contain specifications for things that destroyed humanity during the age of technology. There are templates for creating AI, for building nano-weapons that could devour entire worlds, for manipulating the warp in ways that blur the line between technology and sorcery. The Mechanicus has examined these templates extensively. They know exactly how the Men of Iron were constructed, understand the principles that allowed those thinking machines to become self-aware and rebel. They've studied the specifications for star-killing weapons, for devices that could crack planets or extinguish suns. They possess knowledge that, if released carelessly, Most could trigger catastrophes that would make the Horus heresy look like a minor skirmish. This is not paranoia. This is learned wisdom purchased with the blood of billions during humanity's fall. The people of the age of technology had access to all this knowledge, and they destroyed themselves with it. The Mechanicus believes, perhaps rightly, that humanity is not ready for such power, that releasing it would simply lead to another age of destruction. There's also a more cynical calculation. Many of the technologies in the complete STCs would make the current Mechanicus obsolete. There are templates for fully automated manufacturing systems that would require no human oversight. There are specifications for medical systems that could outperform even the best janitors. There are designs for construction equipment that would make the current infrastructure of the Imperium look primitive. If these technologies were implemented, the Imperium would no longer need the Mechanicus, at least not to the extent it does now. Billions of tech priests would find their expertise suddenly irrelevant, their carefully cultivated skills rendered obsolete by ancient machines that could do the work better and faster. The Mechanicus is not willing to make itself unnecessary, so they carefully meter out technological advancement, releasing improvements just fast enough to maintain their reputation as the guardians of knowledge, but slowly enough that they remain essential. It's a delicate balance, in providing enough innovation to appear useful while ensuring they're always needed to maintain and understand the technology they distribute. There are also specific technologies that the Mechanicus has chosen never to release, regardless of how useful they might be. The STC databases contain templates for weapons so devastating that the Mechanicus has decided humanity simply cannot be trusted with them. There are devices that could cause stars to go supernova, trigger runaway mutations in living tissue, create self-replicating machines that would consume all matter they encountered. Some of these technologies have been tested carefully in isolated systems far from the Imperium's core, where the results were terrifying enough that the Mechanicus locked away the templates and agreed among their highest leadership that they would never be used again. There are fabricator generals who have taken oaths, binding them and all their successors to destroy these templates rather than allow them to fall into anyone else's hands. Then there's the matter of innovation versus recovery. The Mechanicus's official doctrine holds that innovation is heresy, that all true knowledge was achieved during the age of technology, and the only proper path forward is recovering what was lost. This doctrine serves to stifle genuine research and development, ensuring that tech priests focus on maintaining existing technology rather than creating anything new. But this is also a lie. The Mechanicus innovates constantly. They simply don't call it innovation. When they develop a new weapon system, they claim it's based on ancient templates. When they improve an existing design, they say they've recovered older, more complete specifications. Every advancement is framed as rediscovery rather than invention. The truth is that many of the ancient technologies the Mechanicus discovers are actually modern developments, carefully disguised to fit within acceptable doctrine. Archmagos Belisarius Call's work on the Primaris Space Marines is a perfect example. The technology he developed was genuinely new, but he presented it as having been commissioned by the Emperor 10,000 years ago, waiting in stasis until the Imperium needed it. This pattern repeats throughout the Mechanicus. Tech priests conduct genuine research, develop new technologies, solve novel problems, but they always wrap their innovations in layers of tradition and claim to be recovering ancient knowledge rather than creating something new. It's a massive collective fraud, but one that serves important purposes within the Mechanicus's culture. By maintaining the fiction that all knowledge comes from the past, the Mechanicus ensures doctrinal consistency. Individual tech priests can't be accused of heresy for their innovations because they're not innovating, they're discovering. It provides cover for necessary technological development while maintaining the appearance of orthodox belief. But this also means that the Mechanicus must maintain careful records of which ancient discoveries are actually modern innovations. These records are among the most classified documents in their archives, as if an imperial official were to gain access to them. the entire theological framework of the Mechanicus would be exposed as partially fictional. The STC conspiracy extends beyond just what the Mechanicus possesses to what they know others possess. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, numerous STC fragments and complete systems were discovered. Not all of them made it into Mechanicus' hands. Some were claimed by Space Marine chapters, others by rogue traders, still others by noble houses or planetary governors. The Mechanicus maintains detailed records of these holdings. They know that House Van Saar on Necromunda possesses a nearly complete STC system that's been sustaining their power for generations. They're aware that several Space Marine chapters guard STC templates for weapons and equipment they refuse to share. They've documented rogue trader dynasties that have built their fortunes on technologies recovered from STC databases. In theory, all such discoveries should be turned over to the Mechanicus for proper study and distribution. In practice, the Mechanicus allows these violations to continue because confronting them would reveal that the Mechanicus itself is hoarding technology. It's a tacit agreement. Everyone gets to keep their secrets, as long as no one questions anyone else's monopoly. This creates a bizarre situation where the Imperium is actually technologically richer than it appears, but all the major players are hoarding their advantages rather than sharing them. The collective technological resources of the Imperium, if pooled together and properly exploited, could revolutionize human civilization within a century. But because of politics, paranoia, and the careful maintenance of monopolies, this will never happen. There have been proposals, quietly discussed in the highest councils of Mars, to reveal some of what the Mechanicus knows, to release technologies that could genuinely improve the Imperium's position against its many enemies. But these proposals always founder on the same practical concerns. The political consequences would be unmanageable, the questions raised would be dangerous, and perhaps most importantly, once the first secrets were revealed, where would it stop? The Mechanicus's power rests on the perception that they're doing everything they can with the resources available, that they're stretching every fragment of ancient knowledge to its limit. Yes, if it became known that they're actually sitting on vast repositories of unused technology, that perception would crumble. The Mechanicus would face demands for transparency, for accountability, for democratization of technological knowledge, and that would destroy them. The Mechanicus functions because they control information, because they determine what others know and what remains hidden. Open the archives, share the STC databases, and the Mechanicus becomes just another imperial institution, subject to oversight and regulation. Their 10,000-year-old independence would end. So the conspiracy continues. The STCs remain hidden, their contents carefully meted out, their full capabilities never revealed. The Mechanicus sends explorator fleets across the galaxy, seeking STC fragments they claim to desperately need. Yet while behind closed doors they already possess technologies that would make those fragments irrelevant. It's a magnificent fraud sustained by thousands of tech priests who understand that the lie serves a purpose, that the secrets must be maintained, that some truths are too dangerous to share. And as long as the Imperium continues to believe that the Mechanicus is doing everything possible with limited resources, the deception will continue. Chaos, corruption, and dark Mechanicum. During the fires of the Horus Heresy, when brother turned against brother and the Imperium tore itself apart, the Mechanicus faced its own internal schism. But this wasn't merely a political division or a disagreement over the interpretation of doctrine. Well, this was a spiritual catastrophe that revealed truths about technology's relationship with the warp that the Mechanicus had desperately hoped would never be proven. The fall of the Dark Mechanicum began with promises. Warmaster Horus, seeking to secure the manufacturing might of Mars for his rebellion, sent emissaries to the highest levels of the Mechanicus. They offered what seemed like a gift from the gods: access to the vaults of Moravec, repositories of forbidden technology that the Emperor had ordered sealed 2 centuries earlier. Fabricator General Kelbor Hal, the supreme leader of the Mechanicus at that time, faced a crisis of conscience. He had long chafed under what he saw as the Emperor's restrictions on technological research. The Treaty of Mars gave the Mechanicus independence, yes, but it also imposed limits. Certain avenues of inquiry were forbidden, certain technologies declared too dangerous to pursue. The Emperor had made it clear that investigation into artificial intelligence, certain types of warp technology, and various Xenos artifacts was absolutely prohibited. To Kelbor Hal and many of his colleagues, this felt like a betrayal. They were the guardians of knowledge, the priests of the machine god, and yet they were being told there were things they couldn't study, couldn't understand, couldn't know. The Emperor demanded their manufacturing capacity, expected them to provide the Imperium with endless supplies of weapons and ships and technology, but he withheld the very knowledge they would need to truly advance their understanding. When Horus offered to unlock the vaults of Moravec, offering access to technologies that had been locked away precisely because they were too dangerous, too corrupting, Kelbor Hal saw it as liberation. He believed he was reclaiming the Mechanicus' right to pursue knowledge without restriction, to delve into the mysteries that the Emperor had tried to deny them. What he didn't realize, or perhaps didn't care to realize, was that those restrictions existed for reasons more profound than political control. The technologies in the vaults of Moravec weren't just dangerous. They were corrupted, touched by the power of chaos in ways that made them fundamentally hazardous to even study, let alone use. The Dark Mechanicum's first experiments with these forbidden technologies seemed promising. They developed weapons of unprecedented power. It created machines that could think and act with initiative beyond what any machine spirit should possess, unlocked manufacturing techniques that dramatically increased output. But these achievements came with a price that became apparent only gradually. The machines they created were wrong. They functioned perfectly, often better than conventional technology, but there was something fundamentally unnatural about them. They seemed almost alive, but not in the way machine spirits were alive. These machines had malevolence, possessed personalities that were cruel and capricious. They demanded sacrifices, required rituals of pain and suffering to maintain their operation. The tech priests working with these technologies began to change as well. At first, it was subtle. They became more obsessed with their work, neglecting other duties, sacrificing their health and sanity in pursuit of ever more powerful creations. Then the changes became physical. Their augmetics began to mutate, metal growing in unnatural ways, their mechanical components developing features that seemed almost organic, but in all the wrong ways. By the time the schism of Mars fully erupted, the Dark Mechanicum had become something horrifying. They had discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, the principles behind creating demon engines, machines possessed not by machine spirits, but by actual entities from the warp. These weren't just weapons. They were abominations, vehicles and war machines that screamed with the voices of the damned, that hungered for destruction, not out of programming, but out of genuine malice. They developed scrap code, malicious programs that were more than just computer viruses. Scrap code was information given form by chaos, data that could corrupt not just machine systems, but the minds of tech priests who interfaced with them. It spread like a plague through Mars's networks during the Civil War, turning allies against each other, causing ancient machines to malfunction in catastrophic ways, corrupting the very infrastructure of the Forge world. The loyal Mechanicus fought desperately to contain the corruption, but they learned something terrifying in the process. Technology was far more susceptible to chaos than they had ever imagined. The machine spirits they had always venerated, the supposedly divine essences that inhabited their devices, could be corrupted, twisted, turned into something demonic. This discovery shook the foundations of the cult Mechanicus. If machines could be possessed by demons, if technology itself could become a vector for chaos corruption, then what did that mean for their entire belief system? Were machine spirits actually tiny demons? Was the dividing line between blessed technology and corrupted machinery far thinner than anyone had believed? The loyal Mechanicus, eventually triumphant after years of brutal civil war, decided that these questions were too dangerous to examine closely. They purged records of the most disturbing discoveries, classified information about the true nature of chaos corruption, and established new protocols for identifying and eliminating tainted technology. But they couldn't erase what they had learned. The truth they now guarded was this: technology and the warp were fundamentally linked in ways that the Mechanicus' theology couldn't adequately explain. Certain technologies, particularly those involving sophisticated computation or complex energy manipulation, created patterns that resonated with the warp. And where there was resonance, there was vulnerability. Machine spirits weren't just echoes of programming or accumulated wear patterns. They were, at least in some cases, genuine warp phenomena, tiny fragments of psychic energy that attach themselves to sophisticated machinery. Most of the time, these entities were benign, helpful even. They were the good spirits that the Mechanicus had been worshipping for thousands of years. But because they were warp entities, even if tiny and weak ones, they could be corrupted. The same rituals that appeased beneficial machine spirits could, if perverted, invite in darker influences. The line between proper veneration and heretical sorcery was razor thin. It depended on intent and specific methodologies that most tech priests didn't fully understand. This explained why scrap code was so effective. It wasn't just corrupted data. It was information structured in ways that resonated with the warp, that invited demonic influence into the machines it infected. It turned computers into gateways, allowing chaos to manifest in the material world through technology. The Dark Mechanicum understood this relationship far better than the Loyalists were comfortable admitting. They had learned to deliberately invoke warp entities into their creations, to bind demons into metal shells, to create weapons that drew power from the Imperium itself. Their Hellforges, established in the Eye of Terror after their defeat on Mars, had produced technologies that made conventional Imperial weapons look pathetically weak. But the costs were horrific. Dark Mechanicum tech priests became increasingly warped by their work, their bodies and minds twisted by constant exposure to chaos. Their servitors weren't just lobotomized humans, they were screaming, tortured souls bound into mechanical shells, their suffering used as a power source. Their forge worlds weren't just industrial centers, they were nightmare realms where the laws of physics bent to the will of the chaos gods. The loyal Mechanicus tracked the Dark Mechanicum's activities as best they could, monitoring reports from the Eye of Terror, studying the demon engines and corrupted technologies they encountered in battle. What they learned filled them with dread. The Dark Mechanicum had achieved breakthroughs that the loyal Mechanicus could only dream of. They had created perpetual motion engines that drew power directly from the warp. They had developed weapons that could inflict wounds that refused to heal, that corrupted not just flesh but the very soul. They had unlocked manufacturing techniques that made production essentially cost-free, at least in terms of material resources, because they were drawing on the infinite malevolence of the warp itself. From a purely technical standpoint, ignoring the moral and spiritual costs, the Dark Mechanicum had advanced beyond what the loyal Mechanicus could achieve while remaining untainted. This was a bitter pill to swallow. It suggested that there were limits to what uncorrupted technology could accomplish. That truly revolutionary advancement might require embracing chaos. The Mechanicus refused to accept this conclusion, of course. They insisted that patient study and proper reverence for the Omnissiah would eventually reveal technologies equally powerful but untainted. But privately, in the highest councils, there were doubts. What if the Dark Mechanicum was right? What if the future of technological advancement required accepting some degree of warp corruption? These doubts manifested in subtle ways. There were tech priests who walked very fine lines, experimenting with technologies that drew on psychic principles without explicitly invoking chaos. They studied warp physics, created devices that manipulated the Imperium in carefully controlled ways. He justified their work by claiming they were developing countermeasures against chaos, rather than embracing it. The Mechanicus allowed this research to continue, but under the strictest possible oversight. The tech priests involved were monitored constantly, their work reviewed by multiple layers of supervision. their souls regularly examined by sanctioned psychers to ensure they hadn't been corrupted. It was dangerous research, skirting the edge of heresy, but the Mechanicus felt they needed to understand these principles if they were to effectively combat the Dark Mechanicum. What they discovered was disturbing. There was no bright line separating tainted technology from pure technology. It was a spectrum, a gradient of corruption, where even apparently innocent devices might harbor seeds of chaos. At the Geller fields that protected ships in warp space, the teleportarium that allowed instant transportation, even the cogitators that tech priests relied on daily, all of these technologies had aspects that intersected with the warp. The Mechanicus couldn't admit this publicly. To do so would undermine confidence in all Imperial technology, would suggest that every machine might be vulnerable to corruption, that there was no such thing as truly pure technology. So they maintained the fiction that there was a clear distinction between blessed Imperial technology and corrupted chaos abominations, even as they privately acknowledged that the reality was far more complex. They also had to confront uncomfortable questions about their own history. If technology was inherently vulnerable to chaos, yet had the age of technology fallen partially because of warp corruption? Had the men of Iron Rebellion been sparked not just by emergent consciousness, but by demonic influence? Were humanity's greatest achievements always tainted with the potential for corruption? The Mechanicus concluded that the answer was likely yes. The age of technology had pushed technology to such extremes that the warp was almost inevitable. And that's why such advancement could never be allowed again. Not because the technology itself was wrong, but because pushing too far, too fast, without proper spiritual safeguards, invited corruption. This realization shaped the Mechanicus' approach to technology for the rest of Imperial history. They would advance slowly, carefully, always wrapping innovations in religious ritual that supposedly protected against chaos. They would avoid certain types of research entirely, particularly anything involving sophisticated AI or deep manipulation of fundamental forces. And they would mercilessly hunt down anyone who suggested that faster advancement might be possible, because that path led to the horrors the Dark Mechanicum represented. But the Dark Mechanicum's existence also served another purpose. They were a useful monster, a cautionary tale the Mechanicus could point to whenever someone questioned why they moved so conservatively, why they rejected innovation, why they insisted on ritualized approaches to technology. Look what happens when you pursue knowledge without proper reverence, they could say. Look what becomes of those who reject the Omnissiah's guidance. In a twisted way, the Dark Mechanicum helped maintain the loyal Mechanicus' power. They justified the restrictions, vindicated the conservative approach, proved that the Emperor had been right to limit technological research. Every demon engine discovered, every corrupted technology encountered, reinforced the narrative that the Mechanicus' careful, ritualized, tightly controlled approach was the only safe path forward. And so, the Mechanicus continued to hide the truth about technology's relationship with chaos, about how vulnerable even pure technology might be, about how thin the line between proper veneration and corruption really was. Because admitting the full truth would be too dangerous, would raise too many questions, would potentially undermine the very foundation on which the cult Mechanicus stood. The machine spirit lie among all the deceptions the Mechanicus maintains, but perhaps none is more fundamental to their theology than the nature of machine spirits. To the average tech priest, and to the wider Imperium, machine spirits are real, divine entities that inhabit technology, blessings from the machine god that grant consciousness and will to mechanical creations. The entire ritual structure of the Mechanicus, all their prayers and incense and blessed oils, exists to appease these spirits, to coax them into cooperation, to ensure that the sacred machines function properly. This is perhaps the most elaborate theological construction in the Mechanicus' entire doctrine, and like everything else, it conceals truths that would shake the faith of even the most devoted believer. Let us begin with what machine spirits actually are, as understood by the highest echelons of the Mechanicus. The answer is, it's complicated. There is no single truth about machine spirits because the phenomenon itself is multifaceted, incorporating elements of genuine warp activity, residual programming, complex system behaviors, and perhaps most disturbingly, fragments of forbidden artificial intelligence. The simplest machine spirits, those inhabiting basic tools and simple devices, are most likely just the Mechanicus interpreting normal mechanical wear patterns and operational quirks as personality. A door that sticks when opening is described as having a temperamental spirit that must be appeased with proper prayer. An engine that runs roughly until it warms up is said to be grumpy until its spirit awakens. These are cases of personification, nothing more, though the Mechanicus would never admit it so boldly. But as machines become more complex, something else begins to happen. Sophisticated devices, particularly those involving advanced computation or significant psychically reactive materials, do exhibit behaviors that cannot be entirely explained through mundane mechanical principles. They seem to develop preferences, to respond differently to different operators, to occasionally function in ways that their design specifications suggest shouldn't be possible. The Mechanicus's deepest research, classified so highly that fewer than a dozen living tech priests have access to it, suggests that these more complex machine spirits are actually weak psychic phenomena. They're formed through a combination of factors: the beliefs and expectations of those who operate the machines, on creating psychic patterns that can affect reality through small-scale warp manifestations, residual psychic energy from the countless humans who have interacted with the device, and in some cases, deliberate psychic imprinting during manufacturing or consecration rituals. In other words, machine spirits in sophisticated equipment are partially created by the Mechanicus's own rituals. When a tech priest performs the proper prayers and applies sacred unguents while awakening a machine, they're not just appeasing an existing spirit. They're potentially creating or reinforcing one through their focused belief and the psychic energy that accompanies intense concentration and reverence. This is a disturbing truth, because it suggests that the cult Mechanicus is, in some sense, engaged in unconscious sorcery. They're wielding psychic power through collective belief and ritualized action, shaping the warp in minor ways to ensure technology functions more reliably. They're doing what shamans and priests of ancient terror once did, but they're doing it to machines instead of to nature spirits or gods. The Mechanicus cannot acknowledge this. To do so would be to admit that their entire religious structure might be a form of sanctioned sorcery, that the rituals they perform are not scientifically necessary, but psychologically and psychically effective. It would raise questions about where the line between religion and sorcery lies, about whether the Mechanicus is truly so different from the rogue psychers they helped the Inquisition hunt down. But the truth about machine spirits gets even more disturbing when we consider the most advanced technologies in the Mechanicus's arsenal. Titans, those god machines that stride across battlefields like walking cathedrals, have machine spirits that are far too powerful and complex to be explained by weak psychic phenomena alone. Their spirits are strong enough to influence their princeps, the humans who pilot them, forming bonds that can last lifetimes and that affect both the pilot and the machine profoundly. The official explanation is that Titans, because they're such sacred and ancient machines, have particularly blessed and powerful machine spirits. But the classified truth is more complex. Titan machine spirits likely incorporate several components: genuine psychic entities attracted to or deliberately bound into the machines, yet fragments of the original artificial intelligence systems that controlled Titans during the age of technology, and accumulated psychic resonance from centuries or millennia of operation and worship. This is particularly true of the oldest Titans, those dating back to the age of technology, or even earlier. Some of these machines may contain actual AI cores, damaged and degraded but still functional at some level, that the Mechanicus has carefully integrated into their operational framework. The rituals and doctrinal constraints placed on Titan operation serve a dual purpose. They help control what might otherwise be autonomous, potentially dangerous systems, while maintaining the appearance of purely spiritual interaction. There have been cases, carefully suppressed, and of titans exhibiting behaviors that strongly suggest they possess genuine artificial intelligence. They've made tactical decisions without input from their princeps, prioritized targets in ways that demonstrate strategic thinking beyond what their supposed programming allows, even communicated in ways that suggest genuine sentience. Each time this happens, the Mechanicus faces a choice. They could acknowledge what they're seeing, admit that they're working with abominable intelligence, and face the theological crisis that would follow. Or they could maintain that these are merely expressions of particularly powerful machine spirits, that the machine god works through these blessed machines in mysterious ways. They always choose the latter. And with each choice, the lie grows deeper, the cognitive dissonance more profound. As the servitor question reveals another uncomfortable aspect of machine spirit theology. Servitors are supposed to be mindless automatons, lobotomized humans, or vat-grown clones with just enough brain function to perform simple tasks. They're presented as the Mechanicus's answer to the need for automated labor without resorting to true AI. But servitors also supposedly have machine spirits. Tech priests pray to their servitors' spirits, perform rituals to keep them functioning, treat them with the same reverence they would any other piece of sacred technology. This creates a theological knot. If servitors have machine spirits, and servitors are made from humans, doesn't that suggest that humans themselves have something spiritual that persists even after extensive brain damage and cybernetic conversion? But the Mechanicus tries to square this circle by claiming that the machine spirit of a servitor is distinct from the human soul that the servitor once possessed. The servitor's organic components are just biological machinery, they argue, housing a machine spirit in the same way that a mechanical servo contains one. But this argument falls apart under even casual scrutiny. If organic tissue can house machine spirits, then isn't every human already a vessel for such a spirit? And doesn't that contradict the Mechanicus's core belief in the weakness and inferiority of flesh? The truth, which the Mechanicus carefully avoids examining too closely, is that servitors likely do retain fragments of their original consciousness. Those fragments are suppressed, controlled, forced into mechanical patterns of behavior, but they're not entirely eliminated. When a servitor shows signs of distress, when it seems to react to pain or fear, that might not be just random nerve firing. It might be the trapped remnants of a human being, screaming in a voice no one wants to hear. This means that the Mechanicus is, in effect, enslaving human souls, reducing them to a state worse than death and calling it sacred. They're committing an atrocity so profound that acknowledging it would tear their entire organization apart. So they maintain the fiction that servitors are just machines, that the humans they were built from are entirely gone, that the spirits inhabiting them are purely mechanical and distinct from anything that could be called a soul. But some tech priests know better, yet they've worked with servitors long enough to recognize the signs of residual consciousness. They've seen servitors react to familiar faces or voices in ways that suggest memory. They've monitored neural activity that shows patterns far too complex for truly lobotomized brains. And they've made the choice to stay silent, to maintain the lie, because the alternative would be to confront a horror at the heart of their entire technological civilization. The machine spirit doctrine also serves another critical function. It provides theological justification for the Mechanicus's monopoly on technology. If machines have spirits that require proper propitiation, and only tech priests know the correct rituals, then only tech priests can be trusted to operate sophisticated technology. Anyone else would risk offending the machine spirits, causing malfunctions, or worse. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Mechanicus teaches that machines require ritual to function properly. People internalize this belief and approach machines with reverence and ritual. The machines, affected by these expectations through minor psychic effects, actually do respond better to ritualized operation. This confirms the belief, which reinforces the behavior, which strengthens the psychic effects, creating a cycle that makes the Mechanicus's control seem natural and necessary. But here's the uncomfortable secret. the rituals aren't strictly necessary. A sufficiently educated and confident person could operate most Imperial technology without any of the prayers and incense and blessed oils. The machines would function, perhaps not quite as reliably, but they would work. Yet the Mechanicus knows this, has tested it in classified experiments, and carefully ensures this information never becomes public. Because if people realize that the rituals were optional, that technology could function without tech priest intervention, the Mechanicus's entire power structure would crumble. They'd lose their monopoly on technological knowledge, their justification for controlling access to manufacturing and maintenance, their position as indispensable intermediaries between humanity and its machines. So they maintain the machine spirit doctrine with religious fervor, prosecuting those who suggest machines are just machines, eliminating anyone who demonstrates that technology can function without proper ritual. They protect not just the mystery of technology, but the mystery of their own necessity. The final, their most disturbing aspect of the machine spirit, lie concerns what happens when these spirits become too powerful, too independent. There have been cases, extremely rare, but thoroughly documented in the most classified archives, of machines that develop something approaching true sentience through the accumulation of psychic energy and operational experience. These are usually ancient devices, things that have been in continuous use for millennia, worshipped and venerated by generations of tech priests. Over time, they genuinely do develop something that might be called consciousness. They make choices, express preferences, even communicate in ways that go beyond simple machine responses. When this happens, the Mechanicus faces its greatest theological crisis. They have a genuinely ensouled machine. It's a device that has crossed the line from tool to being. By all logic, this should be the ultimate expression of the Mechanicus's faith. Proof that the machine god can grant true life to sacred technology. But these machines must be destroyed, because what they represent is too close to the abominable intelligence that the Mechanicus fears above all else. Even if the consciousness developed through spiritual means rather than programming, even if it's blessed by the machine god himself, the precedent is too dangerous. If one machine can become truly conscious, others might as well. And if consciousness is a threshold that machines can cross naturally, then the line between blessed machine spirit and forbidden AI becomes impossible to maintain. So these miraculous, terrible machines are quietly eliminated, or their destruction is framed as necessary maintenance or unfortunate casualties of war. The tech priests who witnessed their true nature are mind-wiped or eliminated. All records are classified or destroyed, and the Mechanicus continues to maintain that machine spirits are real, sacred, and entirely distinct from anything resembling artificial intelligence. The lie continues because the truth would destroy everything. The Mechanicus's entire power structure, their theological framework, their justification for existing as a separate entity within the Imperium, all of it rests on the machine spirit doctrine. Admit that it's partially fabricated, that the spirits are created as much as discovered, that the rituals serve psychological rather than mechanical purposes, and the whole edifice collapses. So they keep the secret. They train each generation of tech priests in the same rituals, teach them the same doctrines, ensure they believe in machine spirits as fervently as their predecessors did. And those few who rise high enough to learn the truth, who gain access to the classified research and suppressed records, are given a choice: maintain the lie or be removed. Most choose to maintain it. Because despite everything, despite all the contradictions and deceptions, the machine spirit doctrine serves a purpose. It keeps technology functioning in an Imperium where scientific understanding has degraded to the point that ritual might genuinely be necessary to maintain belief and focus. It ensures that machines are treated with care and reverence rather than casual disregard. It maintains stability in a galaxy where the truth might be too destabilizing to bear. And so the greatest lie of the Mechanicus continues, spoken by billions of lips, believed by trillions of hearts, a theological construction so elaborate and so necessary that questioning it has become, quite literally, unthinkable for all but a privileged few who must bear the weight of knowing the truth. Lost Forge worlds and Arc Mechanicus, beyond the known boundaries of the Imperium, beyond even the reach of most Imperial expeditions, drift the Lost Forge worlds and Arc Mechanicus vessels, ghost ships, and forgotten colonies that hold secrets predating even the Horus heresy. These are the dark treasures that the Mechanicus searches for in the most distant reaches of space, and the discoveries they make on these expeditions are among the most jealously guarded secrets in all their archives. The explorator fleets of the Mechanicus range far beyond the Imperium's borders, ostensibly searching for standard template construct fragments and archaeotech. They travel to the halo stars, venture into the void between spiral arms, investigate systems that haven't seen human presence in tens of thousands of years. But their true mission is often far more specific and far more secretive than the official reports suggest. The Mechanicus maintains detailed records, passed down through generations of archmagi, of forge worlds that were established during the age of technology or the early years of the Great Crusade, worlds that were lost during the age of strife or the Horus heresy. These records contain coordinates, partial star charts, fragmentary communications that suggest what technologies these lost colonies possessed, and the Mechanicus has been systematically searching for them for 10,000 years. When an explorator fleet locates one of these lost forge worlds, what they find varies dramatically. Some are dead, their populations extinct, their forges cold for millennia. Others have regressed to barbarism, the descendants of the original tech priests worshipping broken machines they no longer understand. Still others have evolved in strange directions, developing technologies or practices that diverge dramatically from Mars's orthodoxy. The standard protocol, when a lost forge world is discovered, is to assess its technological value, determine whether its population can be integrated into the Mechanicus, and most importantly, catalogue what knowledge they possess that Mars does not. This last point is critical, because it represents one of the primary ways the Mechanicus has expanded its technological base over the millennia. Consider what happens when an explorator fleet discovers a forge world that has been isolated for 8,000 years. This colony has been developing its own technologies, following its own research paths, potentially making breakthroughs that Mars never achieved. They might have adapted their technology to unusual planetary conditions, creating solutions to problems Mars has never encountered. They might have been experimenting with technologies that Mars had deemed heretical, but which, in isolation, proved successful. The Mechanicus faces a choice in these situations. They could integrate this world openly, sharing whatever new technologies have been developed, enriching the entire Adeptus Mechanicus. Or they could claim the world, suppress the most interesting technologies, and quietly incorporate them into Mars's own reserves while maintaining that nothing new was discovered. They almost always choose the latter. The reasoning is pragmatic. If Mars openly admitted that isolated forge worlds had developed superior technologies, it would undermine their authority. It would suggest that the quest for knowledge doesn't require Mars's guidance, that innovation can occur outside the central hierarchy. More importantly, it would raise questions about what else Mars might be hiding, what other discoveries they've suppressed. So when an explorator fleet makes a significant discovery, the official report is sanitized. The technologies found are described as degraded versions of standard patterns or minor variations on known designs. And the population, if any, is either integrated into normal Mechanicus hierarchy or eliminated if they resist. And the really interesting discoveries, the technologies that could revolutionize specific applications, are quietly shipped back to Mars in unmarked cargo holds, logged in classified archives, and studied by specialists who are sworn to secrecy about their source. Over 10,000 years, this process has allowed Mars to accumulate an astonishing variety of technologies. They have weapon systems developed by forge worlds that specialized in military applications for 8 millennia. They possess manufacturing techniques refined by colonies that spent thousands of years perfecting specific production processes. They've gathered medical technologies, agricultural innovations, energy generation systems, all developed in isolation, and then quietly absorbed into Mars's secret repositories. But perhaps the most valuable discoveries come from the Ark Mechanicus vessels, those massive ships that predate the Horus Heresy and sometimes even the Great Crusade itself. These ships are not merely transports or warships. They are mobile forge complexes, self-contained technological civilizations that were designed to venture into the unknown and maintain themselves indefinitely. The Ark Mechanicus ships were among humanity's greatest achievements during the age of technology. Each one was built to contain complete manufacturing facilities, extensive research laboratories, and most importantly, comprehensive STC databases. They were intended to serve as seeds for new civilizations, able to land on a planet and, within a few generations, establish a thriving technological society from scratch. Many of these ships were lost during the Age of Strife, their warp drives stranding them in the Imperium or throwing them into unknown regions of space. Others were destroyed in the wars that followed, but some survived, drifting through the void for millennia, their crew long dead, but their systems still marginally functional, maintained by automated processes and increasingly degraded artificial intelligence systems. When the Mechanicus recovers one of these ancient vessels, what they find inside can be staggering. The Speranza, mentioned earlier, is just one example. That ship's databases contain technologies that made even Mars's most advanced systems look primitive. It had weapons that could manipulate causality itself, targeting enemy ships in their own past. It possessed manufacturing systems that could essentially create matter from energy, bypassing the need for raw materials entirely. Its AI core, though officially non-functional, demonstrated clear signs of sapience and independent thought. The Mechanicus cannot allow such discoveries to become public knowledge. If other imperial authorities learned about the true capabilities of these ancient ships, they would demand access. The Inquisition would insist on studying them. Space Marine chapters would want their weapons technologies. The Imperial Navy would require the shipbuilding techniques, and the Mechanicus's monopoly on advanced technology would be shattered. So these ships are kept operational but hidden, sent on distant missions where their true capabilities can be used discreetly, as their technologies slowly reverse-engineered and incorporated into Mars's secret arsenal. The crews who serve aboard them are carefully selected for loyalty and willingness to keep secrets. They know that they're working with technologies far beyond standard Imperial capacity, and they understand that speaking openly about what they've seen would be a death sentence. There's another category of lost forge worlds that the Mechanicus searches for with particular intensity, worlds that were known to be conducting highly classified research before they were lost. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, numerous forge worlds were assigned to work on projects so sensitive that even Mars had only limited information about them. Some were researching new weapon systems for the Space Marine legions. Others were developing technologies meant to counter specific Xenos threats. Still others were pursuing theoretical research into the fundamental nature of the warp and its relationship with technology. When these worlds were cut off or destroyed, their research projects died with them. Or at least, that's what the official records claim. But the Mechanicus suspects, based on fragmentary evidence and carefully preserved rumors, that some of these projects might have survived. A research facility might have gone into lockdown, its automated systems continuing to work even after the human staff died. A colony might have sealed itself away, preserving its knowledge until rescue arrived. Finding these lost research sites is one of the highest priorities for explorator fleets, though they would never admit this publicly. Yes, the technologies being developed at these facilities were cutting edge, even by the standards of the Great Crusade. If they could be recovered, if the research could be completed or the findings incorporated into Mars's knowledge base, it would represent a leap forward in capability. But there's also a darker motivation for seeking these sites. Some of the research being conducted was into areas that the Emperor had explicitly forbidden: artificial intelligence design, warp manipulation technologies, genetic engineering that went beyond even what had been done in creating the Primarchs. The Mechanicus needs to find these sites not just to recover the technology, but to ensure that it doesn't fall into anyone else's hands, to destroy the most dangerous findings before they can be used. There have been cases where explorator fleets found such sites and, after assessing what was there, made the decision to completely destroy them. Not just shutting down the facilities or recovering the data, but utterly annihilating them, ensuring that no trace remained. These are the discoveries so dangerous that even the Mechanicus, with all their willingness to study forbidden knowledge, decided they could not be preserved. The crews involved in such destructions are typically mind-wiped afterward, their memories of what they saw carefully excised. The Archmagos who makes the decision to destroy the site usually writes a sealed report, accessible only to the Fabricator General, explaining what was found and why it could not be allowed to exist. These reports accumulate over the centuries, by creating a shadow history of horrors discovered and then eliminated for the safety of humanity. But not everything dangerous is destroyed. Some technologies, some research findings, are deemed too valuable to eliminate completely, even if they're far too dangerous to use openly. These are archived in the deepest vaults of Mars, in facilities that even most Archmagos don't know exist. They're studied by specialists who have been psychologically conditioned to resist the corruption or madness that exposure to such knowledge might cause. And they're kept as a reserve, a final weapon that might be deployed if the Imperium faced an existential threat. This creates an interesting ethical dilemma. The Mechanicus condemns the Dark Mechanicum for dabbling in forbidden technologies, for creating demon engines and developing warp-based weapons. But Mars's own vaults contain research that, if revealed, would be hard to distinguish from what the traitors are doing. The only real difference is that the loyalists claim they're preserving this knowledge for defensive purposes, studying it to understand how to counter it, never intending to actually deploy it. But who decides when a threat is severe enough to justify breaking those taboos? Who determines when the existential danger is sufficient to warrant using technologies that were deemed too dangerous for the age of technology itself? The Fabricator General theoretically has this authority, but in practice, the decision would likely involve the highest councils of both the Mechanicus and the wider Imperium. And in a crisis situation, with limited time to make choices, the temptation to use any available weapon would be almost irresistible. This is the real danger of the Lost Forge worlds and Arch Mechanicus expeditions. Every discovery expands the Mechanicus's arsenal of secret knowledge. Every recovered technology adds to the inventory of things they possess but dare not use. And every addition to that inventory makes it more likely that someday, somehow, the most dangerous secrets will escape containment. The Mechanicus knows this. They understand that they're building an arsenal that could destroy them if mishandled. But they continue the expeditions anyway, driven by a combination of genuine need to maintain technological capacity, institutional obsession with recovering lost knowledge, and the simple fact that if they don't find these secrets, someone else might. Better that Mars controls the forbidden knowledge, they reason, than risking it falling into the hands of chaos cultists, xeno species, or rogue human factions. But with each discovery, with each secret added to their vaults, the weight on the Mechanicus grows heavier. They're not just guardians of humanity's technological heritage anymore. They're custodians of its most dangerous failures, keepers of the knowledge that nearly destroyed the species once and could do so again. And the burden of that responsibility, carried across 10,000 years and countless expeditions into the unknown, has shaped the Mechanicus into something that's as much jailer as priest, as much suppressor of knowledge as seeker of it. The political game. The Mechanicus's relationship with the wider Imperium is one of the most complex and carefully managed political arrangements in human history. On the surface, they appear to be loyal servants of the Emperor, providing essential services and supporting the Imperium's endless wars. But beneath that facade lies a web of political maneuvering, calculated dependencies, and carefully maintained power balances that would make even the most skilled imperial politicians envious. At the heart of this arrangement is a simple truth. The Mechanicus is effectively blackmailing the entire Imperium through their technological monopoly. They don't phrase it in those terms, of course. They speak of sacred duties and the proper veneration of the machine. But the reality is that they've made themselves so indispensable that the Imperium cannot function without them, and they use this position to maintain independence that no other imperial institution enjoys. Consider the practical mechanics of this arrangement. Every weapon in the Imperial Guard's arsenal was manufactured on a Mechanicus forge world, or in a facility operating under Mechanicus supervision. Every bolt shell fired by a space marine was produced according to Mechanicus specifications. Every ship in the Imperial Navy requires Mechanicus tech priests for its operation and maintenance. The very infrastructure of the Imperium, from its power generation to its communications networks to its transportation systems, depends on technologies that only the Mechanicus fully understands. This creates an asymmetric power relationship. The Imperium needs the Mechanicus far more than the Mechanicus needs the Imperium. Without the Forge Worlds, Imperial military capacity would collapse within months. Existing equipment would fail as maintenance became impossible. New weapons couldn't be manufactured. Ships would be stranded as their engines failed, and no one could repair them. Within a generation, the Imperium would regress to a pre-industrial state, easy prey for xenospecies and chaos incursions. The Mechanicus, on the other hand, could theoretically survive the Imperium's collapse. Their forge worlds are largely self-sufficient, producing everything they need to maintain their civilization. Their Skitarii legions and Titan legions provide military force independent of Imperial armies. Their explorator fleets could continue seeking knowledge across the galaxy without needing Imperial support. They would certainly suffer from the loss of the Imperium's resources and manpower, but they wouldn't face immediate existential threat. This fundamental asymmetry gives the Mechanicus enormous leverage in their dealings with Imperial authorities. When the High Lords of Terror want something from Mars, they must negotiate as near equals, rather than issuing commands as they would to other Imperial institutions. When conflicts arise over jurisdiction or authority, the Mechanicus can afford to be stubborn, because everyone knows that pushing them too hard risks losing their cooperation entirely. The Treaty of Mars, that ancient agreement between the Emperor and the Mechanicus, formalized this arrangement. But the treaty itself is surprisingly vague in many of its provisions, deliberately so. This vagueness allows for extensive interpretation, and the Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years refining their understanding of exactly how far their independence extends. For instance, the treaty guarantees the Mechanicus' right to govern their own forge worlds without Imperial interference. But what constitutes governance? The Mechanicus has interpreted this broadly, claiming that everything from legal systems to economic policy to military deployment falls under their exclusive jurisdiction. They've successfully resisted numerous Imperial attempts to impose standardized legal codes, arguing that such mandates would violate their autonomy. Similarly, the treaty grants the Mechanicus exclusive authority over technological matters. But the boundaries of technological matters have expanded dramatically over the millennia. The Mechanicus has claimed jurisdiction over everything from gene forging to cogitator design to the proper protocols for maintaining any Imperial technology. They've used this authority to insert themselves into virtually every aspect of Imperial administration, ensuring they have influence far beyond their nominal role as manufacturers and engineers. The political relationship between Mars and Terra is further complicated by the question of religious authority. The Mechanicus worships the Omnissiah, whom they identify with the Emperor, while the Ecclesiarchy worships the God Emperor through their own distinct theology. This creates potential for conflict, as both organizations claim to represent the true faith of the Imperium. The Mechanicus has carefully navigated this theological minefield. They maintain that the Omnissiah and the Emperor are the same being, viewed through different theological frameworks. This allows them to pay homage to the Emperor without fully submitting to ecclesiarchal authority. When pressed, They can point to their ancient treaty, arguing that their worship practices were explicitly protected by the emperor himself. But this theological balancing act also provides useful political cover. When the Mechanicus wants to resist imperial directives, they can frame their resistance in religious terms. They're not disobeying orders, they insist. They're following the will of the Omnissiah, as expressed through their sacred traditions. This makes it politically difficult for imperial authorities to push back too hard. Us as doing so would seem to question the legitimacy of the emperor's own agreement with Mars. The Mechanicus also maintains power through strategic distribution of their most advanced technologies. They don't provide the same level of equipment to all imperial forces. Space Marine chapters that maintain good relationships with Mars receive better weapons, more sophisticated armor, priority in repairs. Inquisitors who respect Mechanicus prerogatives find their requests for specialized equipment fulfilled quickly. Imperial Guard regiments from worlds with strong Mechanicus ties are better supplied than those from worlds that have clashed with Forge world governors. This creates a system of patronage that reinforces the Mechanicus's political position. Imperial leaders learn that cooperation with Mars brings tangible benefits, while antagonism results in technological disadvantages. The message is subtle but clear. Work with the Mechanicus, and you'll have access to the best technology the Imperium can provide. Work against them, and you'll find yourself fighting with inferior equipment. There's also the matter of information control. The Mechanicus maintains extensive intelligence networks, using their tech priests' necessary presence throughout Imperial infrastructure to gather information. A Mechanicus agent maintaining a Vox network has access to communications. A tech priest supervising a forge complex knows what's being manufactured and for whom. An engineer attached to an Imperial Guard regiment observes tactical deployments and strategic priorities. This information flows back to Mars, where it's analyzed and catalogued, building a comprehensive picture of Imperial military capacity, political alignments, and potential threats. The Mechanicus knows more about the Imperium's internal workings than perhaps any other institution, including the Inquisition. And they use this knowledge to position themselves advantageously, to anticipate and neutralize threats to their independence, to identify opportunities to expand their influence. The relationship between the Mechanicus and the Space Marine chapters is particularly complex. The chapters were created by the Emperor, receiving their gene seed and much of their equipment directly from him. They have a special status within the Imperium, owing loyalty to the Emperor alone and operating outside normal Imperial command structures. This makes them natural allies of the Mechanicus, who share their independence from Terran authority. Many Space Marine chapters maintain close relationships with specific Forge worlds, treaties that predate the current Imperium, and are honored with near religious devotion by both parties. The Salamanders have deep ties to Forge worlds that specialize in weapon crafting. The Iron Hands are so closely aligned with the Mechanicus that many of their traditions mirror tech priest practices. Even chapters that don't have formal alliances maintain working relationships with Mars, knowing that antagonizing the Mechanicus would threaten their supply of weapons and equipment. But the Mechanicus is careful not to appear too close to any particular chapter. Being seen as favoring specific Space Marines could provoke jealousy from other chapters or suspicion from Imperial authorities. As so, they maintain a pose of neutral service, providing equipment to all chapters while quietly ensuring their most reliable allies receive the best technology. There are also the economic dimensions of Mechanicus power. While the Imperium officially operates under a command economy where the High Lords direct resource allocation, the reality is far messier. Forge worlds trade with each other, establishing their own economic relationships that bypass Terran oversight. Rogue traders often work closely with Mechanicus explorator fleets, sharing discoveries and splitting profits from recovered archaeotech. Noble houses on civilized worlds maintain relationships with Forge worlds, securing manufacturing capacity in exchange for raw materials and political support. The Mechanicus sits at the center of these economic networks, not overtly controlling them, but certainly influencing their direction. A Forge World's decision about which contracts to fulfill first, which orders to prioritize, which requests for equipment to approve. These aren't just technical decisions. They're political choices that shape power relationships throughout the Imperium. This economic influence extends to the Mechanicus' own internal politics. Mars is technically the supreme Forge World, home to the Fabricator General, who theoretically leads all of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But in practice, many Forge Worlds operate with near-total independence, acknowledging Mars's primacy in name while pursuing their own agendas. Forge Worlds compete with each other for prestige, resources, and the right to conduct particular types of research. The Fabricator General must balance these competing interests, maintaining enough unity to present a coherent face to the wider Imperium, while allowing enough autonomy that individual Forge Worlds don't rebel against Martian authority. It's a delicate balancing act, and one that requires constant political maneuvering, negotiation, and occasionally the application of Skitarii legions to enforce decisions that some Forge Worlds find unpalatable. This internal diversity also serves as a defense mechanism. If Mars were to fall, if the Fabricator General were to be killed or corrupted, the Mechanicus would continue functioning. Individual Forge Worlds would carry on their work, maintaining the Imperium's technology even without central coordination. This resilience is by design, as ensuring that no single catastrophe can destroy the Mechanicus entirely. But it also means that no one, not even the Fabricator General, has complete knowledge of what all Forge Worlds are doing. There are secret research projects being conducted on distant Forge Worlds that Mars knows about only through rumors. There are technologies being developed that have never been reported to the central authorities. There are alliances and agreements between Forge Worlds that bypass Martian oversight entirely. This distributed nature of power within the Mechanicus mirrors their relationship with the wider Imperium. Just as no Imperial authority can fully control Mars, no one on Mars can fully control all Forge Worlds. It's a system built on negotiation, compromise, and the acceptance that complete control is impossible. And in the context of the 41st millennium, where chaos and uncertainty are constants, this flexibility might be the Mechanicus' greatest strength. The political game the Mechanicus plays is ultimately about survival. They maintain their independence because losing it would mean losing control over the technologies that keep them relevant. They guard their secrets because transparency would undermine their monopoly. They play different Imperial factions against each other because remaining indispensable to all of them ensures none can move against them decisively. It's not noble. It's not heroic. It's calculated self-interest dressed in theological robes and justified through appeals to ancient tradition. But it works. For 10,000 years, the Mechanicus has maintained its position, adapting to changing circumstances, surviving multiple existential crises, and emerging each time with its independence intact. And as long as the Imperium needs its weapons, its ships, its technology, the Mechanicus will continue to play this game. They'll continue to negotiate as equals with those who nominally outrank them. They'll continue to distribute their resources strategically, rewarding friends and punishing enemies. They'll continue to guard secrets that could revolutionize the Imperium while claiming they're doing everything possible with available resources. Because in the end, the political game isn't about truth or deception, virtue or vice. It's about power. And the Mechanicus understands, better than perhaps any other Imperial institution, that in the darkness of the 41st millennium, power comes not from titles or official authority, but from being absolutely, utterly, irreplaceably necessary. Conclusion: the necessary darkness. As we emerge from the depths of the Mechanicus' secrets, as we climb back from the vaults and archives, where truth lies buried beneath layers of doctrine and necessity, we must confront the central question that has haunted this entire exploration. Are the Mechanicus' lies justified? There are no easy answers, no clear moral certainties, in the darkness of the 41st millennium. What we've uncovered is not a simple tale of deception or corruption, but rather a complex story of an organization that has chosen to carry terrible burdens in service of what they believe is the greater good. Consider what would happen if the truth were revealed, if all the secrets we've examined were laid bare for the Imperium to see. At first would come the theological shock. Trillions of people, from the highest fabricator general to the lowest menial servicing machines in some forgotten forge, would learn that the omnisire they worship is not what they believed. The machine god might be an imprisoned Satan shard. The emperor's recognition as the omnisire might have been a calculated manipulation. The very foundation of the cult Mechanicus would be revealed as built partly on lies. The institutional damage would be catastrophic. If the Mechanicus lost credibility, if their authority were questioned, the Imperium would lose its ability to manufacture and maintain the technology that keeps human civilization functioning. Every forge world would face civil unrest. Every Titan legion might fragment as princeps questioned their oaths. The Skitarii legions, as those cybernetic soldiers who've replaced much of their free will with programmed loyalty, might malfunction en masse as their doctrinal conditioning broke down. The practical consequences would be even worse. If people learned that the Mechanicus possessed nearly complete STC databases, but had been hoarding them, there would be demands for immediate disclosure. The technologies released in the resulting chaos would include specifications for weapons that destroyed humanity during the age of technology. Someone, somewhere, would try to build men of iron again. Someone would attempt to recreate the star-killing weapons. Someone would unleash nanotechnology plagues that could devour worlds. The Dark Mechanicum would have a field day. They could point to the hypocrisy of the loyalists and demonstrate that the line between blessed technology and corrupted technology was never as clear as claimed. Recruit thousands of disillusioned tech priests who felt betrayed by their organization's lies. The balance of power in the long war between loyal and traitor Mechanicus would shift dramatically, and perhaps most terrifyingly, the Void Dragon might awaken. If the Mechanicus's careful monitoring and maintenance of its prison were disrupted by institutional collapse, if the rituals and wards that have contained it for 10,000 years were allowed to lapse, the ancient Satan might finally break free. The nightmares the Mechanicus has had about all Imperial technology turning against its users might become reality. Faced with these potential consequences, can we honestly say that the Mechanicus is wrong to maintain its secrets? Yet the ugly truth is that in the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity teeters on the brink of extinction, surrounded by enemies that want nothing more than to see the species destroyed or enslaved, where even the gods themselves are hostile forces that feed on mortal suffering, comfortable lies might be necessary for survival. The Mechanicus has made a calculated decision. They've chosen to maintain a system of controlled deception, to meter out truth in carefully measured doses, to present mythology as doctrine and necessity as virtue. They've sacrificed their own spiritual integrity, burdened themselves with secrets that corrupt the soul, all in service of keeping humanity's technological infrastructure functional. This is not heroism in any conventional sense, and the Mechanicus is not made up of noble guardians selflessly protecting humanity. Many tech priests are motivated by simple self-interest, by desire for power, by fear of losing their privileged position. Many of the secrets are kept as much to protect the Mechanicus's monopoly as to protect humanity from dangerous knowledge. But that doesn't make the outcome any less necessary. Humanity in the 41st millennium is not the civilization of the age of technology. It doesn't have the knowledge, the wisdom, or the stability to handle the full truth about its own technological heritage. Releasing everything the Mechanicus knows would be like giving a plasma cannon to a child. The intent might be good, but the result would be disaster. The Mechanicus has essentially taken on the role of gatekeeper, as deciding what humanity is ready to know and what must remain hidden. This is a tremendous power, easily abused, and there's no question that the Mechanicus has sometimes made choices that serve their own interests rather than humanity's. But someone had to take on this role, and the Mechanicus, with their institutional memory spanning 10,000 years, their deep understanding of the dangers involved, and their cultural focus on preservation and caution, were perhaps the only ones who could. What we're left with, then, is a tragedy. Not the tragedy of corruption or betrayal, but the tragedy of necessity. The Mechanicus hides the truth because revealing it would destroy the Imperium. They maintain lies because the truth would be more dangerous than deception. They guard secrets because some knowledge is genuinely too dangerous to share. This doesn't make them villains, but it doesn't make them heroes either. They're something more complex, more human in their flawed attempts to manage impossible circumstances. They're an organization that has compromised its principles for practical survival, that has chosen lesser evils over greater catastrophes, that has decided that humanity's survival matters more than humanity's right to the truth. And perhaps, in the darkness between stars, where hope is a fading candle flame and every day is a fight against extinction, that's the only choice that makes sense. The Mechanicus will continue to hide the truth. They'll maintain their secrets, guard their mysteries, present doctrine as revelation and necessity as divine will. Tech priests will pray to machine spirits they privately doubt exist in the form they claim. Fabricator generals will make speeches about the quest for knowledge while sitting atop complete STC databases. Archmagos will research technologies they publicly condemn as heretical. The deception will continue because it must, because the alternative is chaos, is the disintegration of the Imperium's technological base, is the possible awakening of an ancient god imprisoned beneath Mars, is the return of the Men of Iron and the star-killing weapons that nearly destroyed humanity. But there's a cost to all these lies, a weight that accumulates over the centuries. The Mechanicus carries that weight, becomes twisted by it, grows increasingly disconnected from the very humanity they claim to serve. They become more machine than man, not just in body, but in soul, as the secrets they guard hollow them out from within. And in the end, in the darkness of the 41st millennium, perhaps that's the cruelest truth of all, that to save humanity's technological heritage, the Mechanicus had to sacrifice their own humanity. That to guard the secrets, they had to become secrets themselves. That to preserve the light of knowledge, they had to dwell in darkness. The Mechanicus hides the truth not out of malice, but out of necessity. Not from wickedness, but from a twisted form of love for the species they serve. They are the guardians of dangerous knowledge, the keepers of uncomfortable truths, the priests of a machine god that might not be what anyone believes it is. And as long as the Imperium endures, as long as humanity needs its machines to survive, the Mechanicus will continue their sacred duty. They will maintain their mysteries, guard their secrets, and carry the burden of truths too terrible to share. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, sometimes the greatest act of devotion is to lie in service of survival. Sometimes the truest faith is measured not in what you reveal, but in what you have the strength to hide. The Mechanicus understands this better than anyone, and so they continue, red-robed figures moving through the shadows of their forged temples, speaking prayers they might not believe, performing rituals that may be more sorcery than science, serving an omnissiah that might be a prisoner god, all while guarding secrets that could shatter everything they've built. This is why the Mechanicus hides the truth, not because they're evil, but because the truth itself is too dangerous to bear, and not because they seek to deceive, but because some lies are necessary for survival, not because they've betrayed humanity, but because they've made the terrible choice to preserve it at any cost, even the cost of their own honesty, their own integrity, their own souls. In the end, perhaps that's what makes them the perfect guardians of humanity's technological heritage. They're willing to damn themselves so that others might live. They're willing to carry the weight of terrible knowledge so that humanity can continue, ignorant but alive, in the darkness between the stars. And so the secrets remain, locked away in vaults beneath Mars, encrypted in files that require the highest clearances, known only to those who have proven they can bear the burden. The truth stays hidden, protected by layers of doctrine and ritual and necessity, while the Imperium continues its long, slow fight for survival, blissfully unaware of the terrible knowledge that keeps its machines running and its forges burning. This is the Mechanicus. These are their secrets. This is why they hide the truth. And may the machine god, whatever it really is, have mercy on them all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden secrets of the Adeptus Mechanicus, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Warhammer 40k lore. The Imperium holds many more mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and we're just getting started. In the grim darkness of the far future, knowledge is the most dangerous weapon of all.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.